Hey, so this is the Drunkalogs, a podcast about addiction and recovery in which each guest shares their version of how it was, what happened, and how it is now, and then endures a half-hour Q&A at the hands of your host, Nick Morton.
My next guest is a professional in the private aviation industry. He grew up in a world of excessive privilege and parlayed his street smarts and connections into a thriving weed empire. He and I met in recovery about 8 years ago, but as you will see in this two-part interview, the man I met back then is almost completely unrecognizable from the man I sat down with last week. Won't you please welcome Mark Christopher.
How long have you been in aviation?
A long time, but professionally for 11 years, a little over 11 years.
Right. How long have you been sober?
I've been sober this time 17 months.
17 months?
Yeah,
okay,
so
wow.
that's
well,
why I was
so when I met you last, you had been sober for how long at that point?
Not very long. I was in a rehab, and one of the therapists that worked there was bringing me all the way from this fancy place in Malibu to Jason's. You remember Justin?
No.
The therapist.
I don't remember him.
He brought me there. So I was not sober very long. But there's a big difference now in my recovery than it's ever been before. Because I've been in and out of the 12-step community or recovery community for the first time I ended up in a detox was the day after Thanksgiving in 1989.
And how old were you then?
I was 23.
And where'd you grow up, just to give us some context of who you are?
I grew up outside of Philadelphia.
Right.
On a kind of affluent area known as the Main Line.
Sure.
And I went to a very well-known prep school.
Right.
And
we're probably cousins. Just kidding.
And it was very much like, I guess what describes it, you know, being around movies and everything, when Sony Betamax came out, it's right around the same time that movie Arthur came out.
Yeah, sure.
With Dudley Moore.
Of course.
And it was like, the theme was like millionaire drunk playboy. That was like kind of the environment that I was raised in. Like
me too.
They idolized, like, get drunk and make money. And compete on what schools the kids went to and how many homes they had. And my dad's little network of people, they were very competitive with, like, boats. They all had, like, these big sport fisherman boats. And I remember, like, 7 or 8 years old going, you know, getting in a helicopter in the morning, flying down to Atlantic City Country Club, getting off at the golf course, going into the dining room, eating breakfast, driven over to our boat in Margate, New Jersey, going out fishing all day, come back, take the fish into the country club, they'd make the food, we'd eat, and then we get back in the helicopter and fly back to our house.
Well, that sounds like a very nice afternoon.
No, but at 8 years old, you think, like, you know, this is
the way it's gonna be.
I guess this is just the way the rest of the world lives,
right?
And then, you know, not too much, you know, not too far after that,
right?
You know, the house, the cars one day when, you know, my father was nowhere to be found, which was normal. He was a very binge drinker and disappear for days at a time. But we went outside for my mother to drive my brother and I to this really well-known private school in that area, and the cars were gone. Right. And then the bank started calling, and, you know, and before I knew it, like, we had to leave, and my father was, like, nowhere to be found. And, you know, so I went from, like, you know, the country club summers and summer camps on Lake Winnipesaukee in New Hampshire and all these, you know, we had a home in southern Florida where the boat was taken down there for the winters, and you know, traveling all the time, and, you know, just a lot of abundance. But then pretty quickly it was all gone, and no one was really, you know, and it was right at the same age where I started, like, really questioning, you know, society and thinking, like, there was so much hypocrisy in the schools and in the government, and even, a lot of I always sensed that my father and his network of guys doing business, it was always like it seemed like they were up to something. It didn't.
Did you ever find out like what happened to all the dough and like where it all went wrong, or does it not matter?
I know exactly. My family had been in the manufacturing of pipes, valves, and fittings, and flanges primarily, and So I think to open up the tariffs for Japan to rebuild their country after we gracefully nuked them, they opened up some things to help their economy. And one of them was that they were allowed to sell steel in the United States. And it really had an impact on, a third generation steel business that my father and his mother and his mother's father had been in.
Right.
And it caused a lot of issues. But my father had the gift of the gab, an Irishman. He wined and dined all the utility executives right when they were starting to build nuclear power plants in the United States. And he got
a bunch of contracts.
All of them.
Right.
All of the nukes in the States.
That's good living, I bet.
Yeah, it was until 3 Mile Island had a radiation leak. And then the government went in and audited the construction. And it wasn't anything of a default of his, but it was there was a lot of kickbacks. There was a lot of shady business practices, and the government had to make examples. And my father was one of those people who was indicted, and but he didn't tell us.
Where is he now? Is he still with us on this planet?
No, he's no longer. He's no longer here. But the contrast of private schools, country clubs, multiple homes, helicopters, big boats, and then all of a sudden, a small little 3-bedroom townhouse with my mother having to get a job probably for the first time in her life and going to public school. It was just like, wow.
Wow. How old were you at that point?
We had to move out of that home on my 14th birthday.
Wow.
And it was in the neighborhood where John DuPont had his big farm. He actually killed.
That was the wrestling thing, right?
Yeah. He killed his estate and farm was right down the road from our dogs used to run on his grounds. He eventually shot them. He shot these two beautiful Alaskan Malamutes with
Jesus.
Either he did or someone that worked on those grounds shot these dogs. Man.
Yeah.
So what happened? I had started, questioning authority, questioning the system, questioning, I just had this mind that was just like, is people really giving me a face value? And, I don't know if that's part of being raised in an alcoholic home where you're kind of walking on eggshells, never knowing when I come in, what I'm walking into or what's going to be walking into the home later. So I had a lot of questions, but then I started idolizing, rock stars like Jim Morrison and listening to, the Grateful Dead and Pink Floyd and listening to the lyrics of some of that music and just being like, this system isn't right. But drugs, I remember when we built this big, beautiful home and my father had to be the show off and show it off to his friends. We had this big housewarming party. And he shifted us, my brother and I, over to our cousins the night of the party. And he was such a alcoholic and always looking for a better deal. He sent these guys down in a van to Maryland where there was no state tax on alcohol. And they literally they literally came back from some, liquor mart or something in Maryland to save the state tax with this entire van filled with cases of alcohol. And the next day, they had the tents and a live band and a huge, big backyard. Even when he built it, they had to then build a little tree fort on some of the ground because we had a couple lots that he was going to sell off later. And I came back the next morning and there were people taking the tents down and the chairs and the tables and all, and we had this big basement with pinball and shuffleboard and billiards and a big bar. Right. So the workers were carrying the cases of alcohol to the basement to put them in the bar down there. And there was all this storage area. So me and one of my neighbor friends, you know, we were always riding around on mini bikes and running around. They said, can you help us take these cases of liquor downstairs? So I remember I took it was 6 half-gallon bottles of Beefeater gin in those big green bottles.
Right. Yeah, sure.
And snuck one up into my tree fort.
Nice.
You know, and I was about 10 years old.
Wow.
And because I used to watch how
they were having a good time.
Yeah,
right?
They would drink and they would get louder, and the women would start, you know, being closer to the men, and it looked like it was like a lubricant or like something to make everyone smile.
It was glamorous and
happier,
and,
laughter. And I remember the like probably the next weekend, and all the kids like to come over to my house now because we had like a pool table, we had a pinball machine, we had a shuffleboard, and my father was never, who knew where he was, and my mother was just kind of like this clueless, sweet woman.
Right.
So we would take one of these bottles and sneak it into the basement.
Right.
And we would fill up like an 8-ounce tumbler glass with gin, and then put like high C, like a little splash high C, and guzzle it down, right?
God, you guys must have gotten fucked up.
Yeah, but the funny thing was, is like we would play this game where we would turn all the lights out and we would chase each other around and call it tackle tag. And I would be like hyper and running, and these other kids would be vomiting and puking. My mother would have no idea what was going on, and I'd want more, you know? And this is at like 10 or 11 years old, and I see my 11-year-old daughter now, you know, finishing 5th grade, and I'm thinking, how the hell was I doing this at 10? But, you know, that experience of what that alcohol did for me as a child became a very strong reference point for me. You know, like I would go to school and I would start getting a little bit worried, like if I was able to keep up with the curriculum as academics got stronger, and everyone was getting a little bit bigger and I was staying the same, but we were really competitive in sports, and the prep school was super competitive. It was mostly real Protestant, you know, and my mother was a Russian Jew and my father was Irish Catholic. So I was just like definitely, they used to joke with me, like call me Mick Kike as I got a little bit older, but I always had the reference point of like, no matter what was going on, I had that Beefeater's gin to go back to.
You got something safe to like.
And that was at a young age. And then, you know, with a really bizarre father who was a real alcoholic and a womanizer. He used to bring women home to our house, and my mother would be in, you know, another part of the house, and, you know, he'd bring people back to the house, and they'd all go in the basement and play pool and who knows what. But so having the reference point of the Beefeater gin, and now starting to really identify with Jim Morrison and the Doors, and you know, society's fucked up, and there's so much hypocrisy in the world, and, you know, what does this all mean? Well, this stuff like kind of chills it out, and putting on music, and I remember the Sony Walkman came out.
Sure.
And I thought that was the greatest thing in the world. I made my father, we were up at our other cousins had this place at Sugarbush, and we would go up there in November for Thanksgiving and go skiing. And the Sony Walkman had just come out, and they were renting them at the base of the mountain. And I made my father not rent one, but buy one for me, right? And I remember me and my cousin had brought some of the Beefeater's gin. We used to fill up these like no-cow soda bottles, and we would chug it down and go skiing. And I can remember this like it was yesterday, putting on Jimi Hendrix Are You Experienced tape, and getting, you know, off the ski lift and going down Sugarbush, you know, a little bit buzzed on alcohol, and that music in my ears, and it just separated me from the world. And it was such a rush, you know, and it was like that. I didn't care anymore. So those feelings became such a strong way of dealing with life at a young age, you know? Yeah. So now, you know, now I'm hitting like 13 or 14, and, you know, I'm full blown. By now, I'm like smoking pot wherever I could get it. One of my best friends from prep school. His family, he was the youngest, and his next older brothers all went to boarding schools up in New England. Right. And when they would come home for Thanksgiving or Christmas, we would go through all their shit, and we would find like the newest Grateful Dead records and like Hunter S. Thompson books, which were above our intellectual capacity at the age. Sure. But because they were the older guys' stuff, we thought it was cool. And I remember opening up The Great Shark Hunt when I was about 14 years old.
What's The Great Shark Hunt?
It was a book that Hunter S. Thompson wrote about the, I think it was the Nixon campaign. But there was a line and it said, "When the going gets weird, the weird turn pro." And it was signed, one of his pen name was Raoul Duke. Right. And I remember like thinking as a kid, like, what the fuck does that mean? Right. And I totally know what that means today.
Yeah.
Like,
what does it mean?
Okay. As you develop and you fuel your addiction, or in my opinion, as you separate yourself further and further from the source, God, Buddha, Christ, Allah, whatever you want to call it, the insanity and the whirlwind of life and what you do to yourself, and more importantly, what you do to everyone around you, gets fucking weird. The weird turned pro. I mean, you have people in tears. You hurt everyone and everything around you. But so, from these older brothers, we're getting pot. We're getting turned on to music that no one else really our age was. No one really else could get the access to drugs that we did. And by the time I was, I guess, like 14 or 15, I was looking in medicine cabinets at everyone's house that I went to. You know, I'd be like, "Oh, can I check your house out?" And then I'd go in the master bedroom's bathroom and be like, "Oh, can I use the bathroom?"
Would you find good shit?
Yeah, I mean, I of course. I mean, Quaaludes and barbiturates and Valiums and Tuinols and Secanols. And, at a young age, and by, 14, 15, I was a full-blown smoking pot every day, even though I didn't even like the way it really made me feel.
Sure.
And I had the, Beefeater's gin tucked away.
Right.
And then we had like a source of like pot from, my friends' older brothers. Yeah. And some of them were so burnt out, they didn't even go to school. The parents just said, like, here's some money, like, you stay out of trouble.
And that works.
Yeah. And they like this one boarding school, the Cambridge School in Massachusetts, it was like this alternative progressive school. Right. And a lot of the kids that went there were from like the UK. Right. And they would literally like all show up, put their shit in their dorm rooms and like pick out some, I think they let them make up their curriculum. Right. And then the Dead tours would like kick off in the fall, and they would just all like run to Winnebago and load up on mushrooms and weed and go on Dead tour. And these were
so insane.
These were people that we as kids were looking up to and idolizing. And then, before I knew it, all this shit happened with my family. Yeah. My father disappeared. Right. They took everything. We had to move out of the house on my 14th birthday. And like, I didn't even care. Because I was so into like, this world's so fucked up. Right. Nothing's what it seems on the surface. There's so much hypocrisy. No one's being honest. They're preaching honesty and living right. And it just seemed like teachers were, having sex with other teachers that were married. My mother wasn't allowed to go to the prep school's Mothers Association's luncheons because it was at a cricket club that there was no Jews allowed. So they didn't invite her. It was like Philadelphia was like very, very old. Like,
that's so fucked up.
Yeah. So I was just like, this.
Right. Fuck this.
Yeah, but like Jim Morrison's got it right, or Jerry Garcia and the Grateful Dead, like peace, love, and take drugs. And, I was pretty...
So how does that translate into what happens to you?
Well, when I had to move out, when my brother, my mother, and I moved out of this big, beautiful home on a lot of land, into a small 3-bedroom, little townhouse, and I had to go to public school, and I was just kind of like, I didn't really care that much, but I had such a network of like affluent families from like these country clubs in Philadelphia and then in Southern Florida where we had a home and you know, all my friends were still like, you know, from
super
a
rich,
lot a lot of abundance, and my mother was a mess. My brother was just kind of like a real computer kid and was like really into like building a computer when no one even knew what fucking computers were. Like he wrote a program for shooting craps on like a TRS-80 screen, you know, like the green and black, the green dot black screen. He wrote like how to play craps, and he and I weren't really that close, but when you know the rug was pulled from underneath us. Yeah. My best friend from prep school, his family had, you know, a lot of money, and his brothers were all, you know, either burnt out or going to school in New England. And they were like, the parents were in Florida and they had like a home with like someone that drove my friend around, and it was just like, you know, people call it dysfunctional. These people were hyper functional because they had so much money, but there was a hyper functioning in insanity. You know, it was like, so, you know, I basically spent most of my time with
over
them.
There, right?
Yeah. And the older brothers, they knew guys that were like really into moving large loads of pot from like, you know, Mexico to the East Coast or from Arizona. And I started thinking like that was really cool. Yeah. And, you know, and I'd always been kind of like a rebel and wearing like jeans and concert t-shirts and even bandanas, and you know they would make me change into like khakis and polo shirts with loafers and you know, for school, and then we had to wear a blazer and everything, but as soon as I wasn't in school I would dress, you know, put a Grateful Dead t-shirt on and all that shit. But somewhere around, you know, in that like between 7th and 8th grade, I realized that like if I conformed to what everyone wanted us to be like, I could get away with being a lot more on drugs and do a lot of shady shit. So I started putting on like this costume, but it really wasn't who I was. And that internal conflict, you know, I would use whatever drugs I could steal out of medicine cabinets or I could get from my friend's older brothers. And at the same time, my friend's older brother, he had, you know, he had this guy that used to come in from Hawaii, and he would go in from Hawaii to Arizona, and we'd come in with like a, you know, a tractor trailer, and the back half of it would be filled with bales of pot. And I thought that was the coolest fucking thing. He had long hair in a ponytail, and he was always in like linen beige shorts with flip-flops and tan and like a button-down short sleeve like flowered shirt, you know? And I started thinking like, man, this dude, what he's doing is cool. And, you know, most of the kids that I went to, like, these good prep schools were talking about going into college and looking at all this. I'm, like, thinking about, like, how can I get into doing that? And also, right around the same time is, like, you know, having a lot of material things and now not really having much, but my friend, like, all had, like, lots of money, and some of them were, like, household names. And, you know, so I was like, well, I want to play, like, stay in their world, but how am I going to do it? And I was like, well, maybe I can, you know, figure out how if this guy's doing this, why can't I do it? And, you know, God, there's so much. I know we don't have much time to do this because I could go on forever, but to make a really long story, a little bit less long, I guess. So when I was about I was 16 or 17, this really beautiful Jewish girl who was totally in love with me, whose dad was a big time medical malpractice attorney. And they had like this townhouse in downtown Philadelphia. And then they had like out in the suburbs, like a nice like country house. And she went to this public school that I went to. And she called me up and she said, you know, you got to come down to my parents were in Florida. You got to come down to, my parents. I found these pills are unbelievable. So I drove down to the city. I just got my driver's license. And this beautiful girl answers the door in like her mom's lingerie and says, with a bottle of, I think it was like Tattinger's Rosé champagne and puts in my mouth this pill and says, these are the best pills ever. I drank it down, and it was a real pharmaceutical Quaalude. And this was probably in 1984.
Right.
16 plus 83 maybe, right? And we proceeded to have sex and drink champagne and eat Quaalude. She was 14, I was 16 for the next 3 days straight, right? And there was like this big Centrum like value pack vitamin jar that her parents had in the refrigerator where the champagne stock was. So when I went to leave, I went up in the kitchen, I grabbed this Ziploc bag and I like dumped half of it. I was like, this was it was like ecstasy. I mean, it was better than ecstasy. Yeah. You know, and that kind of changed the direction of my life because Quaaludes were to me, that was just unbelievable. And I remember like probably like a week later, she called me up and she was like, hey, Mark, you know, I really need to know something. My parents are home from Florida and they're saying those special vitamins were really expensive. And either they're firing the maid thinking that she took them, if I didn't get honest that I took them. Did you take any? And I'm like, no, I not me. You know, and I think I was high on them
at the time during the conversation.
Yeah, at the time, but thus, you know, that was probably my first real, like, I was on a mission now to always find Quaaludes, to the point like me and my friends would look in the weekend, you know, big homes and estates for sale in the paper, and we would drive to these open houses.
And would you find Quaaludes in those places? Oh my God.
I remember one time, one of the Campbell Soup heirs, they had like this estate, right? And there was like this woman, like realtor, and she was in like this big, probably like 20,000 square foot home. And she's at the kitchen with like little brochures and stuff. We're like, oh yeah, we check out houses for our parents. Can I take a look around? She's like, yeah. And then someone who lived in the house must have been in like a wheelchair, because I went into the master bedroom's bathroom and all of the shelves were down at like, you know, like waist high, right? And I opened up one and there was like, it was like being in a pharmacy. I mean, there was literally like brown jars of being like what you see in a pharmacy, like Percodan. They didn't have Percocet, Percodan, and you know, Roar 300 milligram Quaaludes, you know, methaqualone tablets, and then like Tuinols and Secanols. And I remember just like, it was unbelievable. And
Did you have a bag with you or something you could dump the shit in?
Yeah, I used to bring Ziploc bags in my pocket and just fill up a bunch of. So, you know, I'm 16, 17,
And would
18.
you sell that shit?
No.
You just
I mean, some if I needed money, but maybe for gas in my car or something.
So you had enough money still somehow?
Yeah, well, of course, I was the only person that could get weed, like from Hawaii, from this dude or this, you know, Mexican scent. So I became like, you know, sort of like the go-to guy. And I knew kids at like private school and now public school, and then from country clubs. And, you know, I knew just a vast.
So you're making a little bit of money dealing.
I started making, for a high school kid, I started making a lot of money. And then I came across somebody that knew where to get these bootleg Mandrex Quaaludes. They were called Mandrex, and they were being made in Mexico. And they were bootlegs, but there was real methaqualone in them. And I met these younger, like Jewish guys from the city that were like borderline like Jewish mafia. They were involved in like bingo halls, and like they had all these good looking girls, but they had nice cars.
Sure.
And, like my father eventually got back on his feet and like moved into like this townhouse and got a couple Porsches and gave me one. And I had lived with my mother for a couple years, and now I moved back into his house. And
where was his dough now coming from?
He took over a sugar refinery company and shut it down. And they had 3 refineries along where riverboat gambling was being speculated. So he was back on his feet, drinking, chasing women. I move in with him. He's got Saab turbos and Porsches, and, you know, it was a joke for a 16, 17-year-old kid living in this environment. And now I had access to all these drugs. And then I met these Jewish guys, and they started fronting me cocaine and Quaaludes, and I was fronting it out to all these, you know, rich suburban, upper middle class suburban kids at public school and private school. it's the equivalent of like the Pacific Palisades and like, Bel Air or Brentwood Park, totally. Where I grew up. And none of the kids paid me, So the next thing I know, I owe these like Jewish mafia kids like $10,000.
That's a problem.
I was like a senior in high school.
And where are you in school? Did you stay at the public school or did your dad put you in a fancy school?
I went to a public school, went back to a Catholic prep school for a year, told my father it was a ripoff. Right. Because the public school actually had a really good academic program. Right. And I really wanted to be around the girls. And I could switch into easier classes, do nothing, get fairly good grades. And so here I am, I owe these Jewish kids like $10,000. I'm a senior in high school. And they're like, well, if you fly down to Florida with this guy that we know and just carry a suitcase back, we'll be even, right? And I'm like, okay, well,
I'm sure that's all on the up and up.
No, but I thought this was cool.
Well, yeah, of course. I mean, you're like, thank fucking Christ. I'm gonna, they're not gonna chop my fucking balls off. I'll carry the damn suitcase.
I was never that worried about that, but I was like, this seems pretty cool. So we flew down to Florida, me and this guy who like ran around the country for these guys and picked up either, a couple 100 pounds of pot out in Arizona or Quaaludes or cocaine or, I don't know. So we went down and I was supposed to carry this suitcase with 10,000 Quaaludes in it. I was supposed to get $1 a piece for them. And, we went down and we carried them back and it was no problem. And the guy was like, okay, well, I can only give you 50 cents. You still owe me $5,000. And I was like, are you fucking kidding me, dude? Like,
I did this thing for
and he's like, oh, well, no, and they would just keep feeding me Quaaludes. Like, I remember, I would take, like, most people would get, like, maybe 10 or 20 for their head. I would be like, okay, well, give me 500 for me and 500 to sell, to cover the cost.
Sure.
And by now, like, my nickname, like, amongst friends was, like, Gumby, because I would always be so high on Quaaludes, they would call me Gumby, or then later they called me Cosmos, because I was so far out there. But I could function, and I could do academics, and I could be around, and all the girls liked me, and I was really popular. I drove Porsches, I had all the, I had the uniform from the main line.
You must have been a fucking sight to see.
I had the freaking pastel button downs, and the freaking... pleated fucking, the whole shebang, the black loafers with the black belt and khakis. I thought as long as I was really dressed nice,
sure,
I could be really high and no one would know. And most of the people didn't.
It's amazing.
That's what's crazy. So I'm like full blown, like as a high school student, full blown, addict, eating pills,
next level here.
Yeah. But 16 years old, I went with my best friend and his older brother and one of his older brother's friends to a Grateful Dead concert. Right. And we went, the Dead usually played at the Spectrum, but this year was April of like 1984. And for some reason, maybe the Sixers or someone was playing at the Spectrum and they're having it at the Philadelphia Civic Center. And we drove down there in the Saab Turbo that I had, which was like, had louvers on it and black tinted windows and big 3-piece modular Epson wheels. It looked like a fucking race car. Right. And we had all this, we had Hawaiian pot from Hawaii. We had mushrooms and, St. Pauli Girl was like the big thing to drink. So we drive down, we park, and we open up the hatchback. We're listening to music, we're drinking, eat the mushrooms, smoking weed. And my friend... his older brother and his friend got in the front seat of the Saab, and they had like this little one-hitter pipe, and they were like putting this Hawaiian pot in it, and they were putting like these little white pebbles, right? And I was like looking up there, I'm like, what are these guys doing, right? So then, like, I walked up to the side door where my friend's older brother was, and I was like, what do you guys got in there? And he looks at his friend, he's like, no matter what, do not give those guys any of this, right? So he gets out of the front seat, the driver's seat of my car. I jump in and I say to his friend, his name was Woodsy, and he was burnt out, living at his mother's, probably in his mid-20s. I was 16. Right. I'm like, Woodsy, if you want to get home, if you want to ride back in this car, you'll give me a hit or whatever the fuck that is.
Right. Yeah. That's fair.
Yeah. So he's like, man, I shouldn't do it. And he was like this real, like, weird looking dude. And he's like, this is like cheese. And I'm like, what's cheese? He's like, oh, here, just take a hit. So it turned out it was heroin. It was pure China White heroin, which I didn't know at the time. So I remember just taking like 2 or 3 big hits and holding it in as much as I could. And then it was like time to go into the show. And so we had pretty good seats. And I'll never forget this as long as I live. Like, so the mushrooms were starting to kick in. And the Dead was playing Friend of the Devil. And there was a girl in front of me with a rose, right? And I could see Garcia's head, like right above the rose. And he was playing the guitar. And they were like, Friend of the Devil is a friend of mine. And then all of a sudden, like, Garcia's head, like, sort of, like, going in a circle above the rose. and then next thing you know, I'm like, they were, like, snapping in front of me, right? And I had this black wool polo sweater on, and it was drenched in sweat when I opened my eyes. And I was on the ground, and there were, like, all these people hovering over me, like, dude, are you okay? And I'm like, wow.
God.
I was like, and I wanted more. I was like, that shit was amazing, right?
Right, it was good.
And that was my, introduction to, I mean, I had played around with Percocets and Percocets, but I'd never smoked pure heroin up till that point, and I really wanted more, and those guys were so mad. We left the concert. We went back out to my father's townhouse. He was out of town somewhere. And I bothered the shit out of them all night to give me some more, of course. Right. I think they might have given me like 1 hit, maybe. So my whole life is like, it's kind of like trying to mix like how I could like be a stoner, total drug addict, smuggling drugs, but fit it into like the, uppity world.
Sure.
So I was like, okay, well, if I wear the costume and play the game and be polite, and cordial and manners and talk politely, that, I could be having like some Quaaludes in my breast pocket of my blazer and be whacked out of my mind. And it was working. Like it was amazing.
Did you scale up your drug dealing? I mean, was there a time when this gets like to be real shit?
Oh yeah. I mean, so I, the guys who I flew down to Florida to get even with, their source for the Quaaludes kind of ran out, and one of the families that I was friendly with, they had been a member at this like real exclusive private island club in North Miami, and one of the doctors there's kids were all fucked up, and one of my best friends, older brothers who was kind of burnt out as well, he would go down to the house in Florida and hang out there for the winter. And he and this guy were friends, and he called me up all whacked up. He's like, hey, man, do you know what Mandrexes are?
Right.
He's like, didn't you have a bunch of them? I'm like, yeah. He's like, oh, my buddy down here, he's got them. And I said, well, can he get me like 10,000 of them? He was like, yeah, but it can't be shady or whatever. I said, no, don't worry, dude. We'll be down in like 2 days, right? So
that won't be shady at all.
Well, I mean, no funny business like not showing up with the money or trying to just take the shit.
Yeah, right.
So me and the guy, we flew down to Florida and we bought this.
What do you pay for 10,000?
We were paying $4 a piece.
So $40,000.
Yeah, we took $40,000 and I got them, flew them back. I took my end. I got even with those guys, and then I took my end of like my profit, just all in lewds.
Right.
Like I loved them so much I could sell some of them. I never sold any of them. I mean, girls would just go insane on Quaaludes. It was unbelievable. But so the guy that I flew down there with those 2 times, he was like a guy that just ran drugs for these guys. He would fly out to to Phoenix, Arizona, and go meet up with these guys in Scottsdale that had like houses with like, a carport filled with bales of pot, like right after harvest in like September, and so he explained to me how that all worked and everything. And I was buying like pounds of pot, splitting them up and everything. But like deep down, I should have been like, I was really academically advanced, but it was like starting to cause a lot of work.
Right.
And I was like switching out of classes. And my brother was like getting more into building computers, and we were becoming really separate. Like he was living with my mother, I was living with my father. And deep down, I knew I was taking the easier, softer way, and I wanted to have fun. Like, they talk about comfort versus character. I was definitely taking the road of comfort and not building any character. And but I alleviated that guilt and shame that was deep down inside of me through the usage of the drugs, the Quaaludes and the pot and cocaine.
When does shit start to go wrong for you?
Not for a while. Because,
really?
Because then, so, all along I'm buying like a pound and breaking it up into quarter pounds. And this guy who was like with me to go to Florida, he was, moving like 800 or 80 to 150 pounds. He was carrying it back from Arizona to the East Coast like every like 2 or 3 weeks. And he knew all the people that like he knew the guys that got where he got it from, and he was dropping it off at the people that were buying it, that the guys that had the money were doing it. And he was like, we could just do this without them. And so I knew a couple older guys from the public school that I went to that went to Arizona State University. So I called a couple of them and I was like, I just wanted to get 10,000, or I wanted to get 10 pounds of pot. And I had saved up $10,000, and I called up one of these guys. I said, hey, do you know where to get any weed or any of those mandrexes that are coming up through Arizona from Mexico, these Mexican quaaludes? And they're like, oh, yeah, come out, dude. We can get whatever you want, So I graduated high school, and like towards the end of that summer, I flew out to Arizona State University, and this one friend of mine, who was a couple years older than me, he lived in like one of these like communities in Tempe, which was like an apartment complex with all these ASU kids and all these girls in bikinis at the pool. And it was just like everyone doing drugs and cocaine and drinking. And most of the people were from Southern California. I didn't know anyone from Southern California at this point in my life. So as soon as I get there, I'm like, can you definitely get me this 10 pounds of pot? And he's like, yeah, but just can you lend me like $5,500? I'm going to get a quarter ounce of blow, and I'm going to sell it, and I'll give you back $7,000. And I was like, okay. And I gave him the money. He disappeared for like the next 7 hours. I'm in this condo by this pool, and like he comes back a couple hours later, gives me the $5,500. He says, I'll give you your $1,500 profit.
Right.
And I'm taking my girlfriend to Vegas. I'll see you Sunday. You can have my BMW to use. And this was like a Friday. And I'm like, he's like, have fun. And I'm sitting in this townhouse. I don't know anybody.
Right,
I got
but
all
that
this.
Seems like a pretty good deal. That's fine with me.
I got all this money.
Right.
And I'm sitting there, and I go outside, and I drink a couple beers with some girls, and then I go back in the house. And when I go back in the house, there's this dude there. And he's like, where's John? And I'm like, who are you? He's like, I own this. I rent it to John. I'm a college student. And John hasn't paid me rent. And I said, he just left to go to Vegas with his girlfriend. He's like, are you fucking kidding me? So I'm like, he's like, who are you? And I'm like, I'm a friend of his from Philadelphia. I came out here. He's like, to do what? And I'm like, well, do you know where to get any weed? And
right.
So he said, I don't really know. He said, how much pot? And I'm like, 10 pounds. He's like, 10 pounds of pot? I'm like, yeah, I just want 10 pounds of pot. So he's like, I have a friend that details planes over at Scottsdale Airfield. I think he might know somebody. So he connects me and this guy comes over, takes me to this house in Scottsdale. And it's all these like Mexican gangsters, right? And they're like, oh man, you got to take 100 pounds minimum. And I'm like, I don't have that kind of money. And they're like, oh no, we'll front it to you. You just take it and you owe it to us. Amazing. And I'm like, I wouldn't know where to sell 100 pounds of pot. Like, it's pushing it for 10.
Right.
And he was like, don't worry. And the guy that I went to Miami with and carried all the Quaaludes, he had explained to me that they would get these bales between, you would pay for them as they were 20 pounds, and they would weigh anywhere from like 19 to 21, and you would take a blow dryer and saran wrap and bounce, right? And then you would like wrap it really good with saran wrap, and then take the blow dryer and it would shrink it, and then you put like a couple rolls of bounce, and then more saran wrap, and then blow dry it, and you would build like this little like pod, like this 20-pound pod, and you get like these fiberglass Samsonite suitcases, put them in there, put clothes over them. And this was, way before
right 9/11.
Yeah, so it was like a joke.
Whatever.
Yeah. Domestically, it was a joke. So you get like 5 of these Samsonites. So you're a college kid.
Right.
You never touch the bag. You say, I have a bad back. You have the cab driver or the bellhops take all the, you never touch them. I don't know what the fuck, that's wrong bags, whatever.
Right.
So I took the weed and I took it back. And I called the kid that was running for these other guys, and before I knew it, was like in a week, it was gone.
Amazing.
And I was like, "Holy!"
That was easy.
I was like, "Holy
Who
fuck!"
knew?
I made like $30,000 in like 10 days.
That's amazing.
I'm like a fucking high school, just graduated high school, and that kind of, in a way, changed the direction of my life because. That guy who owned that place, I went back out there to pay for the weed. And I said, look, dude, I need someone out here. I'll show you how to do it. You just pay a couple chicks, carry these suitcases, take them to the Biltmore Plaza, give them $5,000, let them go shopping, tell them just carry these suitcases, check into a hotel, page us the pager number of what hotel room, have someone pick it up. And before I knew it, I'm like, a freshman at school. I never even went. I checked my stuff into some dorm room at University of Delaware. I was never there. And I was running around the fucking country between Boston, New York, Philly, D.C., and Arizona. And I made a lot of money, like my first semester. I didn't even go back to school the second semester. And now my drug addiction, now I'm addicted to money.
Right.
Quaaludes are my primary purpose of life, and sex on Quaaludes. And, so then I buy a house. I buy this 8-bedroom house with an elevator in it with a friend of mine, his father, who showed me how to launder like some of this money into a piece of real estate.
Right. Where's the house?
It was in Philadelphia in like this new, like up and coming, like trendy area that like people were putting investments into. But it was like mostly row houses. And then at the top of the hill, they had like, this was like a house on 2 lots and a huge garden and a gazebo.
Amazing.
And it had like this elevator for these people that were in wheelchairs. It was unbelievable. And so I furnished the second floor. Right. And the first floor was empty. And I put it on the market right away. And had the second floor like done up with like Bang and Olufsen fucking high end audio and just like money was like I just was like money was fun coupons, like it was just like you do whatever I want whenever I wanted, and I was like, it's the worst thing that can happen to
a drug addict,
and a 20 18 19 20-year-old it was but the internal moral compass that I was changing the true level of what my morals were was like it was like a dull pain or that conscience of
torturing you back there.
Yeah, and the drugs were like were the perfect
way to shut it down.
Yeah, to alleviate that guilt and that shame, because if I had went to college or pushed myself academically, most of my peers all went to Ivy League schools and we're now all like getting like MBAs and doing all kinds of good things with their life, and I'm like thinking I'm like the freaking titan mogul of the universe. Like I was just so arrogant, and I was and then in 1988, right? I found like this big source of like these like bootleg Quaaludes that were like being manufactured from like one of the pharmacists from like the pharmaceutical company that made Quaaludes. My cousin and I, we go up to Princeton, New Jersey to see another cousin. She was getting married, and my cousin was in from University of Colorado. He and I drove up to the wedding, and he was like, give me some ludes, and we're eating Quaaludes and drinking the whole wedding, and I had like a whole bunch of weed in the trunk of my car at my mother's, where my cousin had came and picked me up to drive, and I was supposed to meet up with this guy to like sell him like 10 pounds of pot or something. Right. So, and we had these 2 girls, the girl that actually turned me on to my first Quaalude, her and her girlfriend, who my cousin used to have sex with, they were waiting for us at like this local bar back in Philadelphia. Sure. So we drive back to this bar from the wedding. We leave the wedding early. We're whacked out of our minds on Quaaludes and alcohol. We see the girls, and the guy that's wanting the weed is bothering the shit out of me. So I'm like, follow me and my cousin. So we're driving down the road, and he was bothering me the whole time we were in the bar for another loot, and I really didn't want to give it to him, and I gave it to him, and we were driving to, it was only like a 2 or 3 mile drive from this bar to my mother's house, and he falls asleep, and I'm looking up, and all of a sudden I see the front of this Volkswagen Scirocco going right towards this huge tree, and I wake him up, and he whips it out of hitting the tree, and then when he cuts back in, the car flips, and my window was down, and my head, or first when we hit, we slid across and hit this embankment at this entrance of this home, like a flower embankment, and when we hit it, my head went through the windshield, and when we came back, when we bounced off it, my head came back in, and you can see right here, it caught in there, and it just ripped like leather, I remember, and then the car flipped up on my side, and it stopped, and I was like, whoa, and it was so I kicked out the windshield, right?
Right.
And my cousin had broken the steering wheel and the back part of the seat, and he went vertical, right? So he stood up and was like, whoa, dude, and he just vomited, and he was fine, right? So, and the dude that's in the car following us to get the weed is behind us, and I get out of the car, and I'm standing there, and all of a sudden I notice that there's like blood on these guys. I'm like, dude, are you guys bleeding? And they're like, dude, there's fucking fountain of blood.
Yours is coming out of your face.
Each heartbeat, right?
Gross.
Next thing I know, this fucking, I don't know where the paramedics or ambulance came from. All of a sudden, get on the ground, and I was hospitalized, and I wasn't allowed any medications because I had a potential concussion, and anything that would induce sleep could cause you to go into a coma, so they wouldn't give me anything. And now I remember to this day, this was June 20th, 1988, and I can remember to the day when they came in after about 48 hours of some big, heavy-set African-American woman sitting in a chair next to my bed. Don't fall asleep, Mark. Come on, you could go into a coma. And then finally, the nurse came in and said, you know what? The doctor feels it's okay for you to get something for the pain and maybe let you relax.
Right.
And she I had all these IVs hooked up, and she had this big needle, and I was like, well, what is it? And she said, it's morphine, and it'll really help you. And I remember to this day when watching that fluid go in the IV thing, and then getting like this medicine taste in the back of my throat, and then the warmth that came up the back of my spine over into my forehead, and my eyes got heavy, and I was like, wow.
Oh my God, thank you.
It's like I knew right at that moment that this was going to be a long-term love affair.
Here we go.
Here we go. I was like, whoa.
So long, Quaaludes.
Well, they were getting harder and harder to get.
Right.
Mainly because of Nancy Reagan and her Just Say No.
Right.
So it's really Nancy Reagan's fault that I became a heroin addict because I couldn't get Quaaludes. No, that's so thus started. It shifted from Quaaludes to opiates after that, and I had a bunch of different doctors, and I didn't even have health insurance, but I had all this money, so I thought I was really cool. I didn't need insurance. I didn't know. And it was like $400,000 or $500,000 medical bill. I was in the hospital. I broke all my ribs. I lost half my blood, and 2 plastic surgeons came in to close my face. And I had gravel all over my face. And I remember they taking a wire rim brush and brushing my face. I was like freaking out. But I didn't really care. I just was like laid up for a couple months, and I started getting, eating more and more and more Percocets. And then I went over to that same guy that turned me on to that hit of heroin in my car at the Dead show, and asked him if he could get me some Percocets, and he said, no, but I can get you some of that other stuff.
Right.
And then before I know it, when I still had a lot of money from the weed, and now I had it where I didn't even go near any of it. I had people doing everything. The only thing I did was go collect the money, hollow out phone books, put the money in the phone book, FedEx them over the money to the Mexicans, to my partner in Arizona, keep my end, and smoke $1,500 to $2,000 a day worth of heroin.
Right.
Yeah.
And it's good you had that weed business to support your heroin addiction.
Well, as the heroin addiction got worse,
there
was a big trust issue And
between the Mexicans and you, or between everyone and you?
No, me and the guy in Arizona.
Right.
And I took this girl to Wimbledon after I recovered. After I was out of the hospital about a year, started feeling better. I found another source of fairly good bootleg Quaaludes, and this girl, the one that turned me on to Quaaludes first, she and I had like this crazy sexual chemistry, and we were still taking Quaaludes and drinking champagne and having sex, and so we were going to Wimbledon, and
that's classy.
So it was a fucking disaster because I had never experienced withdrawal. And the guy that was selling me all the shit, he's like, "You're going to Europe for 10 days. What are you going to do? You can't bring this shit through the car." I was like, "That's all bullshit, dude." He's like, "No, here." So he got me like 500 Percocets, and I had a bunch of ludes. I was like, "This should get me." This girl and I, within like the 3 days, it was like all the Percocets were gone, almost all the Quaaludes. She was like, "Oh my God, what did you do with all those drugs?" I took them. And I remember we had, the first time I ever really felt seriously sick from opiate withdrawal, I was in Dover, England, at the White Cliffs of Dover. It's some hotel.
Horrible place. Horrible place to feel that.
And I remember waking up in the middle of the night, and the fucking down comforter, like this white down comforter duvet, was drenched in sweat.
Right.
And I had been smoking heroin every day for almost a year, and I never thought this girl knew because I was smoking in the bathroom, flushed down the toilet.
Right.
So I'm thinking like maybe something I ate, like I got the flu or something. Right. And she wakes up and she's like, "Oh my God, there's so much sweat. Like what?" And I'm like, "I think I got the flu." Right. And then I'm calling like the concierge desk. I'm like, "I need a doctor right away." And she's like, "Are you fucking insane?" She's like, "You're going through heroin withdrawal." And I'm like, how did you know?
Oh my God.
And she was like, "You don't think I saw all those things that you thought flushed down the toilet? They didn't always flush. The piece of tinfoil with little black marks." And thus began like the beginning of learning about the horrors of opiate addiction and heroin addiction and the cycle, that cycle of staying medicated and then running into a situation where you didn't have any. And then you talk about changing your values and your moral compass. It's just like when I would get to the point where
sick.
Oh yeah, I mean, because we went with my father and like 4 of his buddies and they're kind of like girlfriends on the side, and they had rented like this big Winnebago that he wanted me to drive around and then like take the ferry to northern France or like Calais. And
oh my God,
I remember that morning I was like, "Geez, I'm not going anywhere." But my dad's girlfriend, she, like, I was watching her when we flew over. She kept pulling out this huge vial of like Percodan or Percocet. I got my dad to get his girlfriend at the time to give me some of her medication, promising her when we got back to the States I would replace her. Right. And then I went through them in like the day, and then I'm like going to these doctors and trying. And they had like codeine over the counter, and like real. Like 8 milligrams of codeine with like aspirin.
Sure.
And,
I remember that 222s.
Yeah, and if you take enough codeine, it'll.
Sure.
So I just destroyed my stomach. I took like 100 or 200 of these codeine just to like get.
Not
and
crazy.
Then as soon as we got back to the States, I was like, I don't ever want to run out of this shit. And I bought like some huge amount of it from this guy that was flying to Thailand. He and his wife were like sticking like a couple 100 grams up their ass, swallowing rubbers, and I was like buying it at like full retail price and quantity because they didn't really want to sell it.
So it doesn't occur to you after spending a week fucking strung out in England that like maybe the solution, isn't to buy more, but is to figure out how to get off it.
I rush back to the States. I run to my heroin dealer. I buy a whole bunch of it. I do way more than I'm becoming almost like a recluse, you know, like. And I'm slowly fucking up the thing with the weed. When I took that girl to Wimbledon, like I noticed that like we had like 6 or 7 different sets of suitcases.
Right.
And the guy in Arizona was always trying to get me to like turn them on to the people I was selling all the weed to. And I was like, why would I do that, dude? That's my end. Your end is here. So I noticed like when I was in Europe, he had done a deal with one of the guys, right? So I was like, these guys are fucking me now, right? And I was waiting for like to make a score, and then I like shipped a bunch of phone book's empty. It said the money was in there. And we had like a deal that we would always split if we take a loss. So I flew out there. I gave him half of the original money back. So I made my profit, his profit, and half of the capital for the weed, And then the next time he came. He was like, I'm not doing it anymore unless I come and get the money. So he came out, and I had like these other guys go over and like just take it all from him.
Right.
And then he like ran back to Arizona. He said, I'm out. We made enough money. I'm never doing this again. Right. I don't know who to believe. And I'm like full blown, like smoking, like heroin all day. I got all these I just built like this huge material wall. I was so attached to material shit. It was insane.
Right.
Like just the clothes and the cars. I had a Mercedes and I had an SUV when no one had SUVs. And I had like audio equipment and watches and just such a fake existence. And just numbing it all with massive opiate use.
Right.
So I knew I couldn't withstand the habit at the level it was. And, I was starting to burn through a lot of money. And I had the house paid off, right? But I was partners with my best friend's father in that house. But I was burning through a bunch of money. And on Thanksgiving in 1989, I'd been to Wimbledon with the girl in that summer. So Thanksgiving dinner, me and this girl, I found some lewds. Now we had like tapped into like these Quaaludes that were coming from Europe, like Switzerland. And so we're running in and out of the bathroom. I'm smoking heroin. We're eating Quaaludes. And at this, big table with like, Thanksgiving dinner, eating. And so I get this big piece of pumpkin pie and I'm eating it. And I just completely go into a nod into the pumpkin pie in front of like 20 people. Like all these real huffity, like conservative people. Right. So my father's like, what the fuck's the matter with you? And I was like, Dad, you know what? I've been really abusing those pain pills that, remember, like you made Sharon give me some of them. And I what do we need to do to get you off of them?
Right.
I said, I need to go into a detox.
Right.
And he was like, okay, well, Dr. Elliker from the country club that he was a member of, he's the ER physician at Bryn Mawr Hospital, and they have a detox there. So the next day, Friday after Thanksgiving, 1989, I was 23 years old. I went to Bryn Mawr Hospital detox to check myself in to pay cash because I had no insurance. I thought that was cool. And I'm smoking like a gram of heroin on the way to the, hospital with my father in the car. And he goes, he had two like cardinal rules when we were growing up, like drug addiction and being gay, right? So we're sitting in like the admissions part. He's like, don't tell me you're a homosexual too.
Right.
And I'm like, Dad, no, I'm not. Right. I'm not gay. But it was just like, that was like the mentality of what I'm dealing with, right? Like that's all he fucking worried about. Like, not that you're a drug addict and this might be a life-threatening thing. Like, so I check into this place and the doctor, I lie to him. I'm like, hey, you know what? I've been taking a lot of these Percocets. I'm a little out of control with it. Don't really have a problem with Quaaludes or alcohol. He's like, wait a minute, dude. He's like, you got in a car accident from drugs and alcohol, and now you're a heroin, or he didn't know it was heroin. Right. You're addicted to painkillers. You got a serious problem. Like, this is, like, your whole life is going to be put on hold, like, for a long time. Like, this is serious. I'm like, what are you talking about, dude? I said, I got real estate investments. I make a lot of money. I just have a little bit of a problem with opiate dependency. I need to get off that. I'll never give up Quaaludes. I'll never give up alcohol. You're crazy. I know how to make money. He's like, you think because you made some money selling drugs that you're so smart and that no one knows. Everyone fucking knows.
So this was the first person who called you out as being a drug addict? Being a drug dealer?
Yeah, he was like, you're delusional, dude, right? So I'm like, fuck you, whatever, right?
Right.
I check in, and they didn't have methadone at this place, and they didn't have Suboxone, wasn't even in the loop yet.
Yeah.
And they gave you like some blood pressure medication called Catapress and a little bit of like phenobarbital, right? But I was so high when I got there. I went in, I fell asleep for a while, and they woke me up, and they were like, you got to go to like this group. And it was like this video of like the story of Bill W. And there was a girl in tears in like their typical like detox room. And she's in tears and she's crying and the nurses are talking, it's okay. And she's like, this is like her 7th or 8th time being there. And I remember thinking like, what a loser. Like, you've been here how many times and how many rehabs? And I'm watching this movie and I was like looking around like, what the fuck am I doing here? This is horrible. I was like, I am not like these people.
Sure.
They don't understand. I went back to the bedroom and I fell asleep and I woke up in like a drench of sweat and I started getting like anxiety and I go up to the front. I'm like, listen, I wasn't completely honest with you guys. I've been smoking like pure heroin, like more than you need all day long for like a year straight. Right. And I only ran out one time in a year. So I said, this, like, you got to call the doctor. I need extra medication.
Right.
They're like, no, you don't need anything different. There's no difference. It's, opiates are opiates. You're going to have to go through it. You're not going to die. And I fucking lost it. Right. So I kept bothering them. And then they get the doctor on the phone because I was like, listen, if you don't do something, I'm going to. So they gave me a shot of like Ativan. I chilled out for a couple of hours.
Right.
And now it's like early in the morning the next day. And they had told the doctor what I told him. So I call my father. So I'm thinking about leaving. And he goes, heroin addiction? You're a heroin addict?
Right.
I'm like, who? What? How? Who told you? He's like, you're going to Minnesota to long-term treatment. Like, I just hung up, right? And I went to the nurse's station. And I said, where's doctor? I said, his name was Dr. Berman. I said, where's Dr. Berman? I said, you guys broke my confidentiality. I'm over 18 years old. He is fucked. I'm a bright guy. I know the law.
Sure.
Get him on the phone, right? So I'm flipping out. I'm like, you guys ruined my rapport with my family. Yeah. Like, heroin is just not in the equation. Yeah. It would be okay if I drank 4 bottles of scotch or cognac a day. That'd be fine.
Right.
They would think that's funny.
Right.
But heroin is not like, you destroyed my rapport with my family. And then this guy shows up. I'm like, Dr. Berman, I am getting your license. You're going to lose your license to practice medicine. I'm going to sue you. I'm going to sue this hospital. And I said, I am going to fuck your life up. You totally fucked me over. Right? And he said, there's only 3 things that happen to guys like you at 23 years old that are doing heroin at this level. It's like, you bounce in and out of these places the rest of your life. You go to prison or you die.
Right.
And I'm like, dude, I got like a house paid off, no mortgage. I was running this business. I'm like, I just got a little problem with opiates. Physically dependent. Once I get over that, it's all good. I can eat lewds. I can have fun. I'm going to build a real estate empire. Blah, 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 blah. And he's like, you're delusional, dude. I'm telling you right now, if you don't make this the number 1 priority in your life, you are going to fucking die. I left and I went right to my heroin dealer. I'm drenched in sweat while I'm doing this, right?
Totally.
Full-blown withdrawal. Yeah. And now it's exaggerated by the adrenaline of just being in a rage at this guy. Yeah. And, I wish I had listened to that guy.
Sure.
I really do wish because that was from that point on, you fast forward to 28 years. In the last 28 years, I have been in multiple county jails. I've been in a state penitentiary. I've been in the federal system, in federal time. I was incarcerated in Basel, Switzerland. I was thrown out of the country of Switzerland for 5 years and brought back to the United States by Interpol. I have been in every possible type of rehab, detox, psych ward, sober living, modified, controlled behavioral type treatment that you could imagine. Over 60, institutionalizations in the last 28 years, and you know what? None of them worked.
And that's part 1 of this 2-part interview. Next week, the humbling.
The Drunkalogs cover art is designed and created by John DeManil, and the Drunkalogs theme song is composed and performed by Stephen Stout. I am Nick Morton.